Welcome back. I'm Tim Erlander with the Republican Roundtable, and I'm very happy to be with you again. With me again is my co-host, Mark Sullivan. And Mark, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again too, Tim.
And we got a real special guest, Chaz Anderson. And believe it or not, Chaz actually was a door knocker for me long ago when I ran for the state legislature. If you can believe that, you'll believe anything. But Chaz, it's wonderful for you to be here.
Thank you for having me, Tim and Mark.
And I want to, first of all, let's talk about what you're here about. You're head of an organization called OAK, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Tell me about OAK.
So OAK stands for Opportunity for All Kids, and I'm the executive director of that organization. It's an organization focused on school choice and all school choice, public schools, private schools, charter schools, home schools. And what we believe is parents are the best person to make decisions for their children.
Okay.
And so what we're advocating for is making sure that parents have all options available to them. So that means that we have to be at the state capitol advocating for legislative changes. So right now we're kind of in the thick of everything because, as you know, the legislative session started in January and is supposed to end in May. We'll see if it does.
Yeah, right.
That's always a
Now,
question.
traditionally, the legislature doesn't do anything until the last 48 hours.
Right.
Well, I have to say this year they've been quite busy and productive. We've had several committee hearings on our legislation to give opportunity scholarships to low and middle income students, families. And as you know, they've gotten some other things done as well on health insurance and some tax conformity issues. So they're moving pretty fast, but you're right, most of the decisions, the final decisions get made in the last 5 days.
I think the fact that the Republicans have both the House and the Senate is going to make it go a little bit easier. You don't constantly have the two houses clashing on bills all the time. So
Yeah, that's correct. And I worked at the legislature and worked with Republicans controlling both bodies and then a split, the Democrats
Right.
controlling the Senate. And, when you have a split body, I was in the House, you really have to be careful about what bills you send over to the other body, right? So you kind of end up naturally bottling things up until the end. Versus now they can pretty freely send Senate and House files
send things
back
through
and forth, and
at
there's a
least
level
you're
of
going to have
trust.
at least some kind of a favorable reception in
Yep.
the other house.
Yep, absolutely. So that is a difference from last year for sure.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about what OAK is doing with the legislature and what your prognosis would be for results.
Sure. What we are pushing for this session is, and we pushed for it last session and nearly got it done, but as you know, the session sort of collapsed at the end and they didn't pass a number of bills. But what we're pushing for is for individuals and corporations to donate money to a foundation, and that foundation grants scholarships to low and middle income families who want their children to attend a private school of choice. And so if one of us or all of us wanted to contribute to a foundation, we would receive a state tax credit for doing that. So there's tax incentive for us to give money to families who really need that option and want that option. And so we're pushing for this new state tax credit in both the House and Senate.
Okay, now what status does this have now in the legislature in both houses?
So in both houses, it's passed several committees. In the House, it's cleared the education committees and will be heard in the tax committee tomorrow. This is a tax provision, so it actually will be carried in the tax bill. The bill likely won't travel on its own. As you know, the legislature packages up bills and omnibus bills and passes them.
The good old log rolling.
Yes, exactly.
That's what they used to call it.
Now they just call them omnibus bills. So we expect in early April they will pass those omnibus bills and go into conference committee and start negotiating with Governor Dayton. So we still have a little bit of time for the legislature to sort through what spending and tax priorities they
Now,
will have
two
this
questions
session.
are coming to mind. Is there any support on the DFL side for this particular proposal?
Well, I will say that we have had DFL support, and one of our biggest opponents is the State Teachers Union.
That I know.
And they're a pretty forceful force within the DFL politics. So really what this is going to get down to is an end of session negotiation with Governor Dayton. The position of the legislature is likely to be very supportive of this position.
Okay, now some of what you're talking about is contributions from private parties and businesses, right?
Correct.
And then they would get, of course, a tax credit for any of their contributions, very much like any other contribution would be a tax credit.
This would be on state,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
we're,
the
yeah,
state,
we're,
yeah.
we're not, at this point, we're not talking about taking any of the normal state money or anything else away from the public schools.
Correct.
This is all private contributions into a fund that in turn would then give scholarships to those individuals that need it.
Yep, absolutely. So this is private money going to
Right.
a private foundation to fund families in need who want to
Right.
make a different choice.
And so what I can't understand is why then would the teachers union be against this when it's not taking any of the tax money away from their, their precious little public school system?
Well, we have a lot of teachers who are supportive of our efforts, both private and public school teachers. Actually, some of our best advocates for private schools, for instance, for Cristo Rey, come from the public schools. But, I think the union sees this as opening a door they don't want to open, and they really believe that, parents shouldn't be the driver, that the public education system is providing a good system
that they
for
know
them.
better than the parents know
Yeah,
what's
or
good
they
for their
think
kids.
the public education system is good, and that should be the only option for parents. But we know that, not the public school option is not the best option for every child, just like the private school system
No,
is.
no,
I remember door
our-
knocking in Minneapolis, and I would periodically run into a teacher, particularly one who was laid off, and they would immediately start talking to me about what was going on in the public schools and how they supported us. And I said, "Boy, it's sure nice to meet you."
Yes.
I spent a lot of time with these folks because they really made me feel good because I knew they were trying and they cared. But they just didn't get anywhere. And I'm glad to see that you guys are making progress this year at least.
Yep. It's really a philosophical difference.
What do you think Dayton is likely to do? You want to speculate on that a little bit?
That's a good question. At the end of last session, there was an agreement, and then the parties backed away from that agreement. And so I think it really comes down to, what, as you talked about, the log rolling, horse trading,
Yeah.
what does each side want, what are they willing to give up? And that's hard to predict right now. I mean, because a lot could change between now and May.
Now, there's another question I feel I better ask, and that is, what will this cost? And I know that you mentioned it'll be a tax credit. Well, tax credits are money, so that'll cut the income that comes into the state.
Well, the good news is
How
that
much is that, do you think that'll be?
yeah, so the good news is $35 million a year, and that's in the context of, can you guess how much we spend every 2 years on public education? Can you guess the number? Can you guess the number? What do you think it is?
It's in the billions, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Would you be surprised if I told you 17 billion?
I would not be surprised at all.
So 35 million is a very
a
small piece
I'll
compared
say, yeah, so
to
it's
what
a-
we fund public schools.
So it's not going to be a major bite out of our budget.
No, it is not. And as you know, we have a budget surplus of $1.2 billion. So it is a very small piece of
So
that
there's
surplus.
a little bit, there's some running room there, isn't there?
When you get a budget surplus, everyone wants to take a little bit of it and spend it, and all of a sudden you find the whole surplus has been spent, and the next year when there is no surplus, you come up short.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be too anxious to spend that surplus.
Yeah, well, and this is tax relief for Minnesotans and individuals and corporations, and I don't think we're undertaxed in Minnesota.
No, we're not. That's
So-
one thing we can we
So,
can boast about.
I think this is a win-win. You can give tax relief to Minnesotans, and you can improve our education system.
Okay, now with we know, of course, there's been a change in thinking in Washington with the last election, and of course with the Republicans taking over the House and the Senate here in Minnesota. And inevitably now this is going to bring up that nasty little V word, vouchers, somewhere along the way. And how does this play in to the potential for maybe the authorization for some kind of a voucher system?
Sure. And I'll say that, our advocates are very comfortable with the tax credit. We have a wide range of folks supporting us, including the Jewish Community Relations Council and the faith-based communities, and we have a lot of individuals, and they're very comfortable with the tax credit. Some states have implemented a voucher system, and about half the states in the country now have some sort of voucher or choice system.
Well, I
That is
mean,
interesting.
you have to remember, that a lot of people I know, they send their kid to their child to a private school. They're saying, okay, I'm paying tuition at this private school. At the same time, I'm also paying with my tax money tuition for some other kid in a public school. So they're actually paying 2 tuitions.
Yep.
Now, if we do a voucher, all of a sudden, that money they're paying over here to the public school comes over and can go toward their child.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, the education establishment that has used the voucher word to create a boogeyman that doesn't exist, and to keep the status quo in place, which has
That's
failed
DFL
children.
Some of it, I think they're afraid
Boogeymen are
this
what they
the-
deal with.
Yes.
Almost across the board, no matter what the issue is, boogeyman is the way they operate.
Yep, and that's really kept our children in schools
Well,
that are failing.
I think they're afraid that the voucher system is going to wind up taking all this money away from the public school system, and it's going to starve the public school system. And that's really where your main strength for your teachers union and all the other people that are against vouchers.
Yep.
Part of the matter is they want to keep control. This part I've always understood.
Oh.
And they're doing anything they can and everything they can to make sure they don't lose that control.
Yep. And the school choice programs across the country are the most researched programs of any education reform movement. And study after study after study shows that a strong choice program in states not only improves educational outcomes in private schools for students, but it also improves educational outcomes for public schools.
Right.
Because they're really
The
having
public schools
They have to
are
compete.
pressured to present what the parents want
Want.
in order to keep the money in the public school system.
exactly, and that's good. We want that. We should.
It's almost called
Chaz,
free
let me
market,
ask a
you know.
question here. What states can you think of that actually have the voucher system now? You mentioned some of them.
Yeah, it's about 20 states. Actually, neighboring Wisconsin has a voucher program.
Okay.
In Milwaukee, Racine, and a few other cities. It's located in more of the urban centers. In our neighboring states of Iowa and South Dakota, they have a tax credit program like we're proposing. And a lot of the states is sort of scattered all over, which states have voucher programs. They tend to be more south and to the west. And actually, the most recent one is the state of Nevada passed a program, educational savings accounts. That's what we call them now, where the parent actually controls the money and what services they want. And that passed a couple years ago and was challenged in the court and was upheld as constitutional.
Okay, good.
So
That's great.
one of the other states that has a very strong program is Ohio, voucher program. They've had a long-standing program in that state.
That's an interesting item. I was wondering about it. So we can look to Wisconsin to see how this sort of thing works.
Yes, and in Wisconsin, they've had tremendous results. In Milwaukee, actually, Governor Tommy Thompson proposed it. This is in the mid-'90s, so they've had 20-plus years of experience, and the educational outcomes for students are much higher in what they call the choice schools, and
You
they've
should
showed
just
some good
advertise
results.
that on TV every chance you get and yell it in the teachers' union ears. That's what we should do.
Yeah, but when I went to Milwaukee a few years ago, I asked, what really precipitated the superintendent, Howard Fuller, of the Milwaukee schools to support a voucher program. And at the time, they said, well, our graduation rates in Milwaukee were 50%, or only 50%. And I said, that's sad because that's actually our graduation rate in Minneapolis.
Yeah, that's about right.
And so we really need to look at
Minneapolis has a
different.
very low rate of graduation, if I remember right.
Yeah. And so I said that to them, and they said, wow, you guys need stronger choice programs and empower parents.
Look at the tests that they have for the graduation tests the kids take, and you only have like 50% passage in Minneapolis. And
That's a
even a lot of
tragedy.
your communities, your suburbs, aren't a whole lot better than that. 60%, 65%. That means there's still 35% of the kids that are not getting an education well enough to pass what I've heard to be as basically a 4th grade test
Yeah.
that they've got to take in order to graduate from school.
Yep. And that's another thing too. I mean, we have a issue for the students who do graduate and go to Minnesota State, MnSCU system. A third of them need remediation, and they have to take developmental courses in order to catch up. So even the ones graduating are not ready for work or college or post-secondary education.
That's been true for a long time.
Yeah.
And something should be done about it, but what we've got is a vested interest from the teachers union. Well, we have to think of them as a vested interest. They're not looking out for children, they're looking out for their membership. And even more so, they're looking out for the union itself. They're trying to keep the people, the union bosses still in control.
The teachers union, when it really comes down to it, is their interest is more, like you say, themselves and the teachers, and not the quality of the education.
They invariably
That's
favor
secondary.
things like seniority system, which tends to dumb down the teacher quality, which is very unfortunate.
But I don't know if you remember when you ran for public office. I know I remember back, which was quite a while ago. So maybe things have changed. I'll kind of throw that one in there. But I remember when I got the questionnaire from the teachers union, and I was reading through the questionnaire, and when I got done reading it, I said, I can't answer this honestly, and send it back to them, and in any way hope to get their endorsement. Because they wanted, for the most part, more pay for teachers, less responsibility for teachers.
I had the same
You had the
experience.
same experience, yeah. And I will say, being a teacher is a tough job. We have a lot of great teachers in the state. I think sometimes the bureaucracies of school districts do not allow teachers to do their best work. So I think we have
that's
too
very
many
true.
mandates on schools that we should probably rethink and relook at, and we should let teachers be teachers. But the bottom line is that we can't have a one-size-fits-all system for our kids. Our kids are very different, and that's what we're trying to give parents. There's more options.
Now, are we trying to get the control of education, control of the local school district, let's put it this way here, more locally as compared to, now it's becoming more and more top-down. Washington is designing the programs, the one-size-fits-all for the whole country, and the state level, they come up with a program. And so by the time it gets down to the local school board, the local school district, they don't have a whole lot of options. It's all pretty much laid out for them by, Washington, who's one size fits all, state one size fits all, and so you can't, and the local school board is the one that knows what the local kids need.
I worked at the Department of Education. A lot of regulations came from D.C. and from the U.S. Department of Education. And what I think the problem is that we should hold schools and states accountable for results, and we should worry less about how they get those results, right? So instead of what happens is that we tell them how they should get the results, and then we don't really care about the results.
Okay, well
so we need to
how
flip
do
that
you
dynamic.
measure the results?
Sure, measuring the results is
how-
important, but here's an example.
Right
So
now they're
Washington,
measuring them
DC
with tests, and so, which means that everyone teaches to the tests.
Yeah. Tests are important and assessments are important, but here's an example I'll give you. Washington, D.C., they say, well, you need 100% of your teachers licensed. And licensing is based on very, bureaucratic standards. And you may have a teacher who's licensed, but is ineffective. You may have a teacher who's licensed and effective, or not licensed and
So
effective.
they've kind
so-
of talked a little bit about that here in Minnesota, a
Yeah.
bit with licensing some of these,
Yeah.
say someone who's been doing business all their life, and, but they're not, they can't go in and teach a simple little
Yeah, exactly. Like an
basic
engineer.
business class,
Like an engineer teaching a class.
Exactly.
So, so I think they think that's a good metric is how many licensed teachers you have versus are your kids actually learning at grade level and progressing as they should be, right? So that's one of the things that I think the state and Washington D.C. have gone backwards and I think the reason why they do that is because it's easy to measure. Outcomes are hard.
Right.
So I think what we need to do is hold local school boards accountable for results and let them decide how they're going to get those results.
And hopefully they'll start doing something about what they've done with our history curriculum, which basically we've wiped it out as near as I can tell. You run into youngsters who haven't the foggiest idea what this country's about, and that is wrong.
Yeah.
That is just
Well,
criminally wrong.
they've
and-
quit teaching standard history, and they've gone to specialized line,
correct history.
certain lines through history rather than teaching a general history of the country, just plain, the world. You ask a lot of these kids, they know nothing about the Revolutionary War. They know nothing about the Civil War. They know, the Constitution. Just so much of this, they're basically
What you really hate
ignorant.
to do is you have to watch the O'Reilly Factor and listen to Jesse Waters, who goes out and interviews. And if he interviews high school students, the results are just pathetic. Just pathetic. And I sit there and I'm just furious because history is something I've always cared about. And seeing it taught well, they don't have to know everything, but however, there's some things they need to know. They need at least to know about the Revolution, about the Civil War, and then about the 2 world wars, because those really have made the
And some of the whys and what
some
happened.
of the whys, and learn not to make that. This is what history is for, so you don't make the same mistakes all over again.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you repeat mistakes in history if you don't really understand the history. So.
And I just have that feeling that they're going to make tons of mistakes, and we're all going to pay for them. Okay, anything else you want to tell us about Oak?
What it comes down to, we're going to make a strong push at the legislature.
And by a push, what are you going to do? Interview the legislators? Going to sit down with them and tell them what you want?
Yep. So we meet with legislators. We have parents who are very active, especially in our minority communities in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Oh, that's
and
great.
they are pushing for change, and they want to see disruption, and they want to see better schools for their students. And I think it's a real travesty that we continue to just let the achievement gap grow, and it's actually gotten worse.
And
Yes.
now Oak is currently a functional entity, and they currently do collect money and arrange for scholarships and so on. Am I correct?
Right now, actually, what we are operating as is a 501c4 and a C3, and what we do is educate the public and parents about choices, and then we also push our agenda at the Capitol. So we, like yesterday, I had a group of parents up at the Capitol who met one-on-one with legislators in support of the legislation. Tomorrow,
Are these both parties?
Both parties, they push both of them. Tomorrow we have a hearing in which we'll have parents testify to the committee in support of our legislation. What we're really trying to do is put parents out front because we think that parents are in the best position to make those decisions for their children.
Here.
And so, so that's going to be every week we try to make progress with legislators and Governor
Some parents
Dayton.
are not qualified, but however, I think the majority are, and I think on the average they're going to do better than what we've seen from the teacher bureaucrats.
Yep.
And that's what they are. They're not teachers, they're bureaucrats.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate.
So we're busy, and this year is as you know, in the odd numbered years, the legislature sets a 2-year budget. So hopefully by May 22nd, we will have a 2-year budget starting July 1, and we'll have opportunity scholarships in those budget for low and middle income families to exercise
And you'll be
options.
able to start pushing.
Yep, and then if it passes,
Start
then we will
pushing your
start
program.
signing up families and students to exercise those options. So that's
options
very
and-
important.
And looking for contributors and.
Correct, yep. Contributors looking for families and students who want to take those choices, and we'll be busy if it passes.
Well, let's hope we are busy.
Sounds like quite a plan, yes. Hopefully, we will see quite a change in the future. Not
Right now,
only with
we're
that, I
getting
think
close
even
to the
just all
end
the
of
way
our
through.
time, and I'd like to get your reaction to how you think President Trump is doing on the education.
On the education front, okay. My personal feeling is, and this is from my experience of working at the Minnesota Department of Education, is that Washington doesn't have that much positive effect on our local schools. It doesn't matter really who the administration is. When I worked at the Minnesota Department of Education, it was President Bush and President Obama, and it wasn't really a big difference. So I think the best thing that President Trump and the new Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, could do is really look at a lot of the federal regulations we put onto schools and pull some of those back.
I remember when I ran for office that I interviewed a district, and what I was told was that really with the the federal regulations, that they could almost do without the money from the federal government, because in order to fulfill all the regulations to get that money, it almost costs them more money than the money they get from the federal government.
That's
So,
correct. For a lot of school districts, that's the case. For
yeah.
some, not.
When,
but,
when,
yeah.
when, they, when
Are we
and if they
talking
get
about
it.
school districts, or does the state do the negotiation with the federal government?
So the school districts receive the federal money mostly on special ed and what's called Title I, and that's all formula based.
So they're dealing
There's
with
no
the,
negotiation.
so they're dealing with the federal government directly rather than through the state.
They do that. They deal with the federal government mostly through the state, but the state the funding from the federal government is all based on formulas and census data. So it'll be based on the number of special ed students you serve or poverty levels in your school.
One
So
of
it's
the
all
th-
preset.
And,
One of the
and
things
how
I've
much
noted-
that money is eaten up in the bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, one of the things I've noticed is that with regard to special ed, the school districts like to get more special ed kids denominated so they get more money. That's one of the evils of the system. Chaz, I've really enjoyed this talk, and I really appreciate what you're doing in the legislature. I think Mark does too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So.
People like you who are fighting so hard, you need our backing, and I'm just happy we gave you a little bit.
Thank you. And we have a website, www.oakmn.org. So please check us out on the website, and we're happy to have your support.
Well, thank you. Now we're going to have to say goodbye and see you next month.